I admit several things. I admit that I am very much at a disadvantage. I'm living in the south of France, in effect, living in Monaco, where I have access on the television screen to, I think, probably 8 major channels. As you know, in Italy there are about 90 channels, 90 private channels, the biggest televisual country in the world. But in the south of France, despite these 8 channels which are available, I see very little good television. Very, very little indeed. I mean, they've hardly begun in France to realise what television is. One of the great glories, one of the great joys to me of coming back to England is to watch British television. I know I should be going to the theatre, I should be going to the cinema, I should be going out to dinner, but I prefer to stay in my hotel room watching television. But it's so good. Now, the best television we see on the South European screen is normally British television. Things like Brideshead. But another thing I would say was, when I just mentioned that I saw Brideshead as a continuity. It was rather like reading the novel at a sitting. I'm not quite sure how it works out when you have this separation of episodes, when you see one episode one week and then you have to gather into your mind your memory of what you saw last week when seeing the next episode. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, had the theory, I think it's probably a sound theory, that the literary experience should be encompassed in a single sitting. That's why Edgar Allan Poe never really wrote novels. He wrote long short stories. He said the short story, like the poem, was the ideal literary form because it could be encompassed in a single sitting. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, not in installments. If you had to hear the first movement this week, the second movement next week, and so on, you wouldn't get much sense of what Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was like. That is one thing that is the novelist lacks today. After all, even War and Peace was written as a series, quite apart from Martin Chuzzlewit and Bleak House and so on. The great advantage there was that, and this is something I lack, I feel, as a novelist, Dickens, as Tolstoy did, had a contact with his readership. When Martin Chuzzlewit was being serialised, I believe, Dickens knew very well his readers were not satisfied with his sending his main characters to America, so he brought them back as quickly as he could. This is admirable. We don't get much feedback, you know. As novelists, we don't get a lot of feedback from our readers, not in this country. I don't know whether it's to do with the reticence of the British, but Americans are much more forthcoming. If I publish a book in America, I do get letters, I do get telephone calls, I do get some indication of how the book is going down. This is very valuable to us. We do feel that writing fiction is a rather lonely job. One is stuck in a room there typing away. The book comes out, you read the critics. The critics, of course, very rarely understand the book. I'm a critic myself, so I know how endemic this incapacity of the critic to understand a book is. You're reading it too quickly, for a start. You don't have time to digest the book. We writers thrive on criticism. We don't know what we're doing. We have to be told by the critic what we're doing. And we normally have to go to America, where some professor of literature will spend a little time on our work and then produce an essay of about 3,000 or 4,000 words in some critical journal. It's something mad in the fact that we have to go across the Atlantic for any kind of feedback at all. There was a book recently published by a friend of mine, American, called Leslie Fiedler, who is the Mark Twain professor in the University of New York at Buffalo, who wrote a book which I don't think has yet appeared in England called What Was Literature? One of the problems I and many other writers, and particularly critics are having at the present time, is to decide what kind of status to give to the books that people actually read, as opposed to the books we feel they ought to be reading. I think there's a hell of a lot of hypocrisy going on. When I produced this little squib recently, an indication of what books we might attempt reading after 1939, I was severely rebuked for putting in Ian Fleming's Goldfinger. This is not literature, I was told. I'm told that Ian Fleming is not a genuine writer, that Freddie Forsyth is not. Yet, I was rebuked again in a different way, or rather deliberately, as it were, taken down a few pegs when I was met at the airport coming here by the managing director of Hutchinson, my publisher, who said, you know, we're publishing Freddie Forsyth's new novel in the autumn. That is the great event of the year. You know, with printing 170,000 copies, then you feel very, very low. In other words, I'm working in an elitist category. Yet, the fact is that Freddie Forsyth's novels are not reviewed. Critics don't take them seriously, yet these are what people read. Literature has become rather dead. It's become a slab to be dissected on a slab, and the living literature may well be somewhere else. I think we are indeed at a kind of critical crossroads. There are various things happening at the moment in the field of popular narration, whether it's the novel or the television series, the television play, the film, where we haven't got our standards quite right. Well, I think the vice, there's an inherent vice in the novel form. The form itself encourages prolixity, encourages irrelevances, discourages the great virtue of the film script, which is absolute concision, the use of various visual adjuncts, symbolic adjuncts, if you like, which can indicate more clearly a state of mind or a human situation than a long description can. Despite Henry James's devotion to the art, I think Henry James has done a lot of harm. He's encouraged prolixity, he encouraged vagueness. I always feel a great vice of a novel like The Ambassadors is that we don't know what the industry is that has given the Strother family its wealth. I think it was Mary McCarthy who suggested they made safety pins, but we don't know. It's the Jamesian incubus is still with us, and it's countered immediately by the film. When one writes a film script, when one adapts a novel or a short story into a film, one has to cease to be literary. And this is the great lesson that very few writers, including myself, can really learn. It's the lesson that Scott Fitzgerald was unable to learn. Even though he knew instinctively what was required, and as he indicates in his last unfinished novel, The Last Tycoon, he knew what was needed. Remember the scene that is presented as a model. The couple getting into an elevator, the married couple getting into an elevator, and a pretty young girl gets into the elevator, and the man takes off his hat. The hero of the Last Tycoon says far more about the relationship between this married couple than any number of words can say. Never, you see, you're working. Words pull one way, images pull another. As writers, we're in love with words, and this is probably the vice that gets into the novel. In France, there are many novelists who are not really novelists. They are word men. They feel it's up to them to work in the genre of the novel. It's their due. It's their duty. I think this was probably true of André Gide, who was essentially a man of letters. But he felt it was due to him, it was due to his verbal genius to practice the novel form. This happens more in France than anywhere else. With a lot of us, I don't think we start off with a specific narrative talent. I think we start off with a kind of vague poetic talent. We're not perhaps good enough to become poets. We're not prepared, or we lack the integrity to spend our lives in poverty, just exploiting the connotations of words. We turn to the nearest form, which is the novel. But I think that the novelist, is vitiated partly by love of words. He's practicing a word form, and yet there's a possibility that the novel itself is not a word form, but is fulfilled in the film or in the television series.